Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we'll be taking a deep dive into O Jardim das Aflições, which translates to The Garden of Afflictions. It's a collection of essays by Brazilian philosopher and writer Olavo de Carvalho. It was published between 1993 and 1996.
Oh, wow. So almost 30 years ago now.
Yeah. And this book, it's not just some dry philosophical text.
Oh, definitely not.
It's a very vibrant and sometimes pretty biting critique
Yeah.
of Brazilian intellectual life in the 90s.
It really captures the energy of that time.
Definitely does. And we're going to explore some of Carvalho's key arguments and examine his critiques and hopefully spark your curiosity enough to maybe check out the book yourself.
I definitely recommend it. It's a fascinating read, even if you don't agree with everything Carvalho says.
For sure.
He's definitely known for his provocative style. He doesn't shy away from strong opinions at all.
Oh, absolutely. Which always makes for an engaging read.
For sure. It's like you have a front row seat to some really heated intellectual debates of the time.
Totally. You really feel like you're in the thick of it. So one of the most intriguing ideas that Carvalho presents is the concept of the imbecile collettivo, or the collective imbecile.
Right.
Now, before, you think he's just insulting everyone. It's not about individual stupidity.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, imagine it more like a cultural atmosphere, almost like a fog that kind of discourages real intellectual depth and pushes everyone towards superficial trends.
Right. It's this pressure to conform to what's popular, even if it's intellectually shallow.
Yeah, exactly.
And Carvalho points to a group he calls the intelocratas as playing a big role in this.
The intelocratas.
For those who might not be familiar, he uses this term to describe those who control the flow of ideas and information,
Right.
but often lack true intellectual depth themselves.
So they're like the gatekeepers of knowledge in a way, but maybe not the deepest thinkers themselves.
Precisely. They're the ones who decide what's in and what's out in the realm of ideas.
I see. So they're almost like trendsetters, but for the intellectual world.
Sweet.
It's a really interesting concept. And Carvalho argues that these intelocratas, they end up shaping the collective imbecile by prioritizing trends and popularity over actual intellectual substance.
And it makes you wonder if this dynamic still holds true today.
It's a great question. I mean, think about our world today. With the constant flow of information on social media and the 24-hour news cycle, are there figures who act like modern-day intelocratas,
Yeah.
influencing what we think about and discuss?
It's definitely something to ponder. And Carvalho doesn't stop there. He gets pretty specific with his critique, calling out certain intellectuals of his time.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back.
He accuses some of blindly following European intellectual trends.
Like which ones?
Well, particularly postmodernism and relativism,
Yeah.
without really engaging critically with the ideas.
Right. So he's saying they're just adopting these ideas wholesale.
Yeah, without really questioning them or considering their implications.
And for listeners who might not be familiar with these terms,
Sure.
what exactly is postmodernism and relativism?
So postmodernism is a philosophical movement that questions grand narratives and absolute truths.
Okay.
While relativism suggests that truth and morality are subjective and depend on context.
So basically everything is relative.
In a way, yes.
Interesting. So how does Carvalho view this uncritical adoption of these ideas?
Well, he sees it as a form of intellectual laziness and a lack of originality.
That's pretty harsh.
It is. But he also sees it as a rejection of traditional values and hierarchies.
I see. And he argues that this leads to a blurring of the lines between high culture and popular culture, where everything is considered equally valid, regardless of its artistic or intellectual merit.
Right. It's like he's saying that by rejecting traditional standards, we lose the ability to discern between what's truly valuable and what's simply trendy.
And he has a pretty interesting anecdote to illustrate this point. He talks about a protest where people demanded funding for graffiti art over a production of Mozart's The Magic Flute.
Oh, wow.
And the protesters argued that graffiti was more representative of Brazilian culture.
So he's contrasting, kind of a classic art form with something more contemporary.
Exactly.
And for Carvalho, this highlights a tendency to prioritize simply documenting what is, over striving for excellence and deeper meaning.
So he sees this obsession with representation as a form of cultural stagnation.
Precisely.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about the balance between celebrating diverse experiences and upholding standards of excellence in art and culture.
Absolutely.
It's a complex issue for sure. And Carvalho's critique doesn't stop there. He also takes aim at the media and its influence in shaping public opinion and trends.
Oh, this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, let's dive into that more after a quick word from our sponsors.
So before the break, we were starting to look at Carvalho's critique of the media. He's very critical of journalists.
Yeah, how so?
Well, he accuses them of focusing on sensationalism and superficiality more than on in-depth analysis.
So he thinks they're more interested in grabbing attention than in providing real insight.
Exactly.
It does seem like there's a lot of that these days.
Yeah, it can be hard to find reliable information in the constant flood of news and opinions.
For sure. It's like everyone's trying to shout the loudest, even if they don't really have anything important to say.
Right.
So how does Carvalho connect this back to the collective imbecile?
He argues that the media actually contributes to it. Instead of encouraging critical thinking and thoughtful discussion, they often just reinforce the superficial trends that Carvalho is so concerned about.
So instead of challenging the collective imbecile, the media is actually perpetuating it.
Precisely.
And he uses some of his own experiences to back this up.
Oh yeah, he shares some pretty interesting anecdotes about submitting articles to newspapers.
And what happened?
Well, he says that editors would often remove his nuanced arguments and historical context, turning his work into what he felt were shallow pieces focused on personal attacks.
Oh, wow. So they were basically just trying to stir up controversy rather than presenting a balanced perspective.
Right. And it really frustrated him because he felt like they were misrepresenting his ideas.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's one thing to have your work edited, but it's another thing entirely to have it completely distorted.
Exactly.
So it seems like Carvalho is pointing out the media's tendency to oversimplify complex issues, reducing them to sound bites and catchy headlines, and sacrificing truth and depth for clicks and views.
It's a problem that's only gotten worse since Carvalho's time.
Definitely with the rise of social media, it's even easier for misinformation to spread.
Right.
And it makes it even more important for us to be critical of the information we consume.
Absolutely. We have to be aware of those potential biases and the tendency for oversimplification.
And not just accept everything we read or hear at face value.
Right. It's a challenge to stay informed while also staying critical.
But it's a challenge worth taking on.
For sure.
So moving on from the media, Carvalho also talks about this new elite that has replaced the traditional bourgeoisie.
Right.
Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. He suggests that this new elite, made up of intellectuals and those in positions of power, control information and try to shape public opinion and even morality.
It sounds like he's talking about a kind of thought police.
In a way, yes. He's concerned about the influence that this group has on what people think and believe.
And what's particularly interesting is that he sees this new elite as embracing a kind of double standard.
Yeah, he criticizes them for advocating for relativistic values.
Which is the idea that truth and morality are subjective, right?
Right.
But at the same time, they demand strict conformity to their own set of moral standards.
Exactly. It's like they want to have it both ways.
So they want the freedom to define their own truth, but they don't want to extend that same freedom to others.
Right.
And Carvalho provides some examples of this.
Yeah, he points to the trend of praising authenticity while criticizing anyone who holds traditional values.
So it's like they're using relativism as a weapon to silence opposing viewpoints.
Exactly.
It's a really insightful observation.
It makes you think about how power dynamics can shape the conversation and determine what's acceptable to think and say.
It's a crucial question for sure, and one that's still very relevant today.
Definitely.
Now, another major theme in O Jardim das Aflições is Carvalho's defense of traditional values and hierarchies.
Yes, and this is something that he returns to again and again throughout the book.
So what are some of the values that he's advocating for?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of recognizing objective truth and the need for intellectual rigor.
So he's pushing back against that postmodernist idea of relativism?
Exactly. He believes that there are certain truths that are universal and timeless.
And that we need to be able to recognize them.
Right.
And he also argues that abandoning traditional values has led to moral and cultural decline.
Yes, he sees a direct link between the loss of these values and the problems that society is facing.
This isn't just an abstract argument for him.
Oh, no. He connects these values to real societal issues.
Like what?
Well, things like family structure, religion, and even the role of art and culture.
So he sees these values as foundational.
Yes, they provide a framework for meaning and purpose in a world that can often feel fragmented and uncertain.
And he has a very powerful quote about this.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember what it is?
A culture entirely fixated on the kingdom of this world has nothing to offer the people but miserable lamentations and histrionic protests.
Wow, that's a pretty strong statement.
It is, but it really captures the essence of his argument.
He's basically saying that without a grounding in something higher, we're left with nothing but emptiness and despair.
Right.
It's a sobering thought.
It is, and it makes you think about the role of values and principles in shaping a healthy society.
It's a conversation that's definitely worth having.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about Carvalho's critiques of intellectuals, the media, and this new elite. But one thing that really stands out to me is his defense of traditional values.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme throughout his work.
It's like he's offering an alternative vision to the trends that he's criticizing.
Yeah. Exactly. He's not just tearing things down, he's also trying to build something up.
And that's what makes O Jardim das Aflições such a thought-provoking and engaging read.
It's a book that challenges you to think deeply about the world around you and your place in it.
And it's a book that has the power to spark real conversations.
Absolutely.
So if you're looking for something, that will get you thinking. And maybe even challenge your assumptions. I highly recommend checking out O Jardim das Aflições.
I second that. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent this episode exploring O Jardim das Aflições.
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating look at Carvalho's ideas, from his concept of the collective imbecile to his critiques of intellectuals and the media.
And let's not forget his defense of traditional values.
Oh, right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting contrast to a lot of the trends he's criticizing.
Yeah, it's like he's presenting an alternative to the intellectual and cultural currents of his time.
Exactly. And one thing that really stands out to me is that he doesn't just offer these abstract theories. He grounds his arguments in real-world examples and anecdotes from Brazilian culture and history.
Right.
He seamlessly weaves together philosophical insights with cultural commentary and even personal experiences to create this really rich and multi-layered critique.
It's what makes the book so engaging.
Absolutely. And while his main focus is on Brazil, I think a lot of his observations about the challenges of navigating a rapidly changing world resonate far beyond Brazil's borders.
Yeah, I agree. He's tapping into something universal.
Exactly. It's not just about Brazil.
Yeah.
It's about the human condition in a way.
And it's not just about academics or intellectuals either. He's really trying to speak to a broader audience.
And he does it in such a captivating way.
Oh, yeah.
He's not afraid to be provocative and humorous.
He uses irony and sarcasm.
Yeah.
And even a bit of mockery sometimes.
To really drive his points home.
Yeah, it's what makes the book so much fun to read.
It definitely keeps you on your toes. You never know what he's going to say next.
But one thing's for sure, he makes you think.
Absolutely. And even though Carvalho is a controversial figure, the intellectual force of his arguments is undeniable.
Right. He's not afraid to tackle big questions and challenge conventional wisdom.
And that's why O Jardim das Aflições is still so relevant today, even decades after its publication.
The issues he raises about culture, morality, truth, power, they're all timeless and universal.
They're questions that we're still grappling with today in our increasingly complex and interconnected world.
And the book isn't just a critique either, it's also a call to action.
In what way?
Well, he's urging us to engage more deeply with these issues, to think critically, and to stand up for the values we believe in.
It's a reminder that intellectual engagement isn't passive.
Right. It's about being active participants in shaping the world around us.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, one of the most important things, I think, is to be more critical consumers of information. Carvalho reminds us to be aware of the biases and agendas that shape the narratives we encounter, whether in the media, in academia, or even in our own social circles.
Yeah, it's not about rejecting everything outright, but about approaching information with a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to question assumptions.
Exactly. And I think it's also crucial to engage in dialogue with people who hold different perspectives.
Oh, yeah. Even if it's uncomfortable sometimes.
Right. It's not about winning arguments or silencing dissenting voices. It's about seeking understanding, finding common ground, and recognizing that we can learn and grow from those conversations, even when we disagree.
It's about recognizing that ideas have real-world consequences and that the choices we make shape the world around us.
Exactly.
Well said. So for our listeners out there, if you're looking for a book that will challenge your assumptions, spark debate, and encourage critical reflection, O Jardim das Aflições is definitely worth exploring.
And even if you don't agree with everything Carvalho says, I think you'll find it to be a thought-provoking and stimulating read.
Absolutely. So that wraps up our deep dive into O Jardim das Aflições. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep diving deep.